Hey guys, this is John with CheatSheetPros.com, and we're going to do a quick tutorial on the 2021 NFL cheat sheet. So it's going to change a little bit from what you see now, but not a lot, and it's also going to change a little bit from week 1 to week 2 when some more data that's coming is going to show up. So this year we're going to have 5 tabs across the bottom. We're going to have targets, projections, our advanced DVP, Vegas tab, stacks tab, and then our main tab. So let's go ahead and get started and run through them real quick. So we're going to start here on the main tab, and this is your very basic. It's got your players, your positions. We have our little algo number. I would not use it because 2 of the columns we don't have any data for, so I'd hold off till week 2, week 3. And then we got our team, our opponent, our DraftKings salary, projection, value. Same thing with FanDuel over here. These 2 columns that are blacked out are the stats that the player put up last week. Since this is week 1, there is no last week. And then also their average for the year. So I just blacked them out and shrunk them a little bit until we get a week under our belt. And then this year we're pulling our ownership projections from a new place. And so we've got them in there for DK and FanDuel. When we scroll over here on the right, let me speed this up. We got our standard DVP, so it's points to the specific position and the ranking of that position. So it's a quick overview of your DVP. And then for the player, this is what their team stats are. So this is the overall rank, their rushing offense, passing offense, rush yards a game, pass yards a game, total yards a game, so you can get an idea if they're good, they're bad. Most people know it's football, but I threw it in there anyway. And then this is the good one. This is your opponent team stats and ranks. So the opponent that this player you're looking up is facing, this is the rush defense, the pass defense, the rankings. This is how they are against wide receiver 1s, wide receiver 2s, tight ends, and then pass catching running backs. So when you see running back, just think this is the receiving portion of it. So it's going to be pass catching running backs, not fantasy points to that position. So this is the ranks. All these ranks, since week 1 hasn't started yet, this is from the entire season of last year. So take it with a grain of salt. A lot of teams changed, added players, etc., etc. You guys know the drill. These are your basic Vegas stats: line open, current, how much it moved, what the total is. And then we got the time over here. So if there's a early slate, afternoon only slate, you can filter out by the times. This is pretty basic. I don't use this tab a ton, but it's one that you can use when you're tinkering through looking for players and stacks. And then I'm going to go down here to the end and work my way back. So the target tab, this is everything from last year. So this is targets from week 1 all the way through the wild card, divisional round, conference, Super Bowl. And then they got some additional stats over here as far as like targets per game, yards per target, total targets, total receptions, etc., etc. Weeks 1 to 17, I kind of highlighted. If it's, I think I did 9 and up, I highlighted it green. And then if it's like 7, 8, 9, it's this kind of just basic tan color. And then if it's less than, I think, 4, it's blue. So you can kind of look here. So Kelsey, you can kind of look and see how many games he had, 10 plus targets, which he was, 13, 12, 10, 12, 8, 10, 12, 12. He was phenomenal all year. He was a target monster. But when we get started for the week, we'll start this out, go week 1, week 2, week 3, and we'll fill it out so you can see, who had some targets. What's sneaky about this is like if you go to week 1 and you sort targets high to low, you might see a guy that, he might have got 15 targets. Maybe he only caught 3 of them for 30 yards, so no one really noticed, but you see those 15 targets, he could be someone sneaky to use. One that I'm curious to see this year is Amari Cooper. When Dak was playing before he got hurt, look at these targets: 14, 9, 12, 16, and somewhere in here Dak got hurt, went out, and then they just kind of fizzled off. But targets are always fun to look at, so we've got a tab. And you can see up here at the top, I put little tips for the sheet. So here you can filter out by the team and see where the targets are going. And you can also use targets to pick between 2 like players. Filter out by team, what I mean by that, for example, let's say It's going to make me unlock it. All right, so let's say we go over here and let's say Atlanta. You can pull in all the Atlanta Falcons, and then you can see, who's getting the most targets, which last week, week 1, it was Ridley, Gage, Julio. They all got a bunch of targets, and you can kind of see it pretty much was Ridley all year. Gage was the clear number 2, but this will show you if there's a number 3, number 4. For a big slate, it's not that big of a deal, but when you get into like a showdown slate where the wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 could explode, that's where you want to find out who could get those targets. What games in the past has this person seen those targets, so to speak. And let me go ahead and close that. And then we've got our projection tab. So this is going to be a little bit different. I added this tab because a lot of people play prize picks, and I can't reach out and grab or scrape the data off prize picks. So I wanted to do just a raw projections tab so you can go through and just say, okay, who's projected for the most passing yards this week, rushing yards, passing TDs. And you can see we've got our players over here, team, running backs, our Vegas numbers, and then we've got pass yards, passing TDs, rush yards, rush TDs, receiving yards, receiving TDs, receptions, and then we've got our DK, FanDuel, salaries. It pulls these for the main slate. DraftKings projection and value, FanDuel projection and value, and this is going to be a lot of fun over here. This is the rounded projection. So I hate it when it says, we'll take the top guy here, McCaffrey. So, for example, in week 1, he's projected for 82 rush yards and 0.7 TDs. I hate 0.7 TDs, just make it 1. So the rounded projection is going to take anything that's 0.5 and round it up to 1. So these guys that are 0.58, 0.84, 0.93, 0.7, it's going to give them the touchdown and round that up and put it in the projection. So you're going to see a little bit different numbers over here. So you can upload your DK projections into your Opto, run a lineup. If you don't like it, you can come back and grab these projections and run it in the lineup. And this is the new value. And I left this little yellow column over here on the right. This is the change. So you can see, for example, McCaffrey, he's projected at 27.7 on the base DraftKings projections. And then when we round up that touchdown, it's going to bump him to 30.34, which doesn't seem like a lot, but that's going to take his value from 2.9x to 3.2x. So that's really going to change when you put it in an optimizer and you start running several lineups. And the easiest thing to upload these, I'm going to go to Garbage Cruncher and just kind of show you. So this is kind of the week 1, and I went ahead and put these to save some time in here. So I went ahead, and if you just go into like an Excel and you just copy all the players and then copy the projections, you can put them side by side and it will give you those. So let's highlight them. So I always put them side by side, Control C to copy, come over here to Fantasy Trash, and then you can see I had some uploaded, so Control V, you're going to paste them in there, just player name, projection, click upload, quick process. So whoever this guy is, he's probably a 0, I'm not worried about it. Then we're going to come down here and we're going to go 5 lineups, and we're going to do my projections. Now, one of the things that I do have on here that I turned on when I was getting ready for the video is a stacking rule. So it just says you're going to stack the QB with at least one wide receiver or tight end from the same team. Pretty basic. So I'm just going to go through and do 5 lineups real quick with my projections. So with these projections, it pulls up, let's see here, we got Matt Ryan stacked with Calvin Ridley, and it gives us Eckler, CMC, Moore, Higgins, Kittle, Callaway. Not a bad lineup. And then we get one down here with Kyler Murray and Rondale Moore, and a lot of the same players. So you can put a cap on your exposure if you want to. To give you an example, like let's see the Cruncher projections. Now let's run and see if their lineup looks the same. So theirs is completely different. So they've got Allen, Carson, McCaffrey, Marvin Jones, Higgins, Chase, Pitts, Diggs. I really like that. That's good. But this just gives you some options. And then I was going to go through and run a couple with these other projections, but to save time, I'm not going to. You guys get the point. Let me go ahead and close out that. So another thing you can do with this, it's great for if you're betting player props or prize picks. You can come in here and look and say, maybe Christian McCaffrey to score a touchdown is, minus 150 or whatnot. You can kind of look and see, what they're projecting, or maybe receptions. Maybe you're going to go on prize picks and you're going to do a card of just reception leaders. You can come in here, sort by receptions, and see which guys are projected for the most receptions. You can do receiving yards, move it up top, and just go from there. I mean, even pass yards, you can kind of pull them up and see. And you can see I've highlighted when you get up here to the top, we got the green, the yellowish, and then the normal for the tops. But that's basically raw projections across the board. So you can look at QBs, whatnot. If you have a fantasy league that's got some crazy ass scoring, you can come on here and kind of see what the raw projections are to see what that would do. You can add a column and calculate your own if you want. That's fine. It's not a big deal, but just another fun tab to play with. I'll use this a lot in my videos if I'm doing prize picks and player props while we're going through football. And then we got our advanced DVP. So last year we had our normal DVP, and it was just basically, it looked like this. It was like, okay, well, it looked like these two actually. It said, okay, Detroit gives up this many points to these positions, and this is the rank. And that was kind of it. Well, I kept finding myself going back and saying, well, how many yards is that? Is that significant? Is it, the same? So we kept the fantasy points allowed to each position, and then the total. That's usually what I'll sort it by from high to low. And then we did it on a ranking system. If you don't want to look at the numbers and you just want the straight ranks, you can say, okay, the Jets, they're dead last against the tight end. That's fine. But what I like about this is I brought in some more stats. So this is quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. So you see the rank first, then you see how many fantasy points, and then you see yards allowed and TDs allowed. So for example, if we're looking at this top one, so we're going to say Detroit, who's awful and should still be awful this year. To the quarterback, last year they were giving up the 31st most points. So 25.4 fantasy points per game, 297.1 passing yards, and almost 2.5 touchdowns per game. So quarterbacks were very positive against Detroit. Running backs the same way, 32.7 points, 115.9 yards, and that's a lot. You can see this team right below, it's only allowing 70.6 yards per game. So if you're between two guys that you're going to start in even your season long or DFS, you could look at these two and say, okay, wait, well, this team's giving up 70 yards a game. This one's giving up 115. And then even the TDs here is significant. You got 0.5 per game to 1.2. I mean, that's a pretty significant difference. And the same thing, wide receivers, tight ends. Wide receivers, I did bring in the receptions for tight ends and the wide receivers so you can see how many. So like this team's given up 16 receptions, 191 yards, and 1.3 touchdowns to the wide receiver position. And you can see this team here is giving up a bunch to the tight end. They're giving up, 5.5 catches, 68 yards, and pretty much a TD a game. So if you're looking at starting a tight end and you've got someone who, let's say this team's allowing 0.19 touchdowns per game to the tight end, not good. But if you've got someone that's allowing 0.88, you could say, okay, 88% of the time they're giving up a touchdown to the tight end, and this one's 19% of the time. So we got some more stuff here for DVP, and you can see the tips up here. Good place to find the path for success. So for example, if you've got a team that's, let's say they're number one against the running back, but they're 28th versus the wide receiver, well, your stack would be the quarterback, the wide receiver, obviously. And if you're between a couple players, you can go side by side and see, what the opponent's allowing as far as targets, yards, receptions, and whatnot. So this will be fun to follow throughout the year. And then we go to our Vegas tab. I don't really like the way this tab looks. I'm going to tinker with it, but honestly right now I'm just too tired. It looks just like the one, our Vegas board on our MLB sheet. We've got the teams, rough projection here, just averaging out some points allowed. And again, this is from last year. And then we've got our open current line, any line changes, total changes, percentage of money, how it moved around. I don't like the color scheme that's on here now, so I'll probably tinker and change it as time goes on. And then finally, last but not least, the favorite tab of all, the stack tab. This is the one I use the most in basically every sport that I do. So down here at the bottom, we're not going to have any production yet because we haven't had week 1. And so if you remember from last year, we'll have the fantasy points scored each week, and we'll fill this out as we go along. So you can look back and say it's week 5, and you look back and you can see what Trevor Lawrence did the last 4 weeks. We'll have all these numbers filled in there. And then I keep a running ceiling of the last 5 weeks, their high game. So, because you got to have someone who has somewhat of a ceiling. But again, this won't be filled out for week 1. It looks pretty much the same. I tinkered with this over here. I added this column and I changed up the stacks down here. Everything else is pretty much the same from last year. We've got our Vegas projected score, Vegas line, open, current, changes. We got our public money, where it's at. If it's over 80%, it highlights it. We have some basic stats up here. Points per game allowed, yards per game, rushing yards, passing yards, home, away, all the splits for the season, all that good stuff. And then you take over here we have yard per point, which we'll go over more of that when we get into the sports betting videos. Here, this is just the percentage of run versus pass that the team does. So you can see Jacksonville, Houston, last year they both passed a bunch. That's all that says. As far as sports betting over here, if you remember, we had 2 models. We had our safe model, and it gave us a projected score and a total, and then a weighted model that's a little bit more complicated and a little bit more skewed. And so this will give us a rough projected line to compare to the current line. But again, this is from last year, so be kind of careful with it. And then the yard per point line, it's what a lot of sports bettors use. It's a very generic, easy to come up with line, and it's actually pretty predictive. So I have that in there just as a big number so you can compare it. But again, we'll go over that in the sports betting. Now for the fun part. So right here we have the trenches. This is a lot of fun. So you can see this team, and then this is what their offensive line versus defensive line is for just your overall. So this is saying Jacksonville has the 11th offensive line against the 28th defensive line, so that's a big advantage for Jacksonville. And then we break it down on how they do on 5 to 10 yard runs, 10 plus yard runs, and then power runs. So power runs are if they need like 1 yard, 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2, 4th and 1, 4th and 2. It ranks that. And then these are kind of open field yards. You know, after you get 10 plus yards and you're chucking it down the field, how the team does. So you can see here, Houston's just terrible all the way across the board. We'll see if they're any different this year. And then 5 to 10 yard runs. But if you see something like this that's advantage, 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 it's probably going to be a good running scheme for this offense. And then you flip over here, and now it's advantage on the other side. So 5 to 10 yard runs last year, Houston was dead last. Their overall offensive line finished 27th. And then slight advantage over here for Jacksonville on that side. What jumps out at me, like if this was something we were looking at and they were current stats, is that both teams are horrible at allowing 10 plus yard runs. You can see Jacksonville against Houston. Houston's dead last. And then Jacksonville's not much better. They're 30th. So what are they, 3 up from the bottom? So to me, this would be a game I'd probably lean the over. A lot of explosive run plays, big chunk yardages. That's kind of what this would indicate looking at the trenches, but this will really help you find running backs, see if they're good to play, whatnot. Pass protection versus defensive pressure. I looked at this a little bit last year. I didn't use it a ton. Where I ran into it is if you get one that's like 30th versus number 2. Okay, yeah, they're going to wreak havoc. But if you get something that's like 13th versus 19, who cares? I just kind of go on. So like right here, this little pop-up says QB will be under pressure. So Jacksonville was 24th in pass protection, but Houston was 11th in applying pressure. So that's something to keep an eye on, just with a grain of salt. Houston, nothing there. Team pace, if you're betting second half, first half numbers, I had some people want me to put this in there, so I just did the rank. So this is basically saying Jacksonville is 6th in pace. They rank 12th in first half pace, 3rd in second half pace. So if they're down, they're going to play really fast in the second half. That's all that's saying. And this is saying Houston is 12th in pace. They were 7th in first half pace, 17th in second half pace. So I wouldn't bet them if they're down big in a second half to come back based on looking at this. Now this has your situational pace. So leading by 7, losing by 7, and basically everything in the middle, it'll show you the pace. So for example, Jacksonville, when they're leading by 7, they run the slowest. They're 30 seconds, so they're running that clock all the way down. Houston does not. They're still 12th fastest pace, even when they're leading, which probably wasn't very much last year. When you're down 7, Jacksonville, you can see, look, they have a huge difference there. So they play at the 30-second pace when they're up, so really slow, which that's good. And then when they're down, they play really fast. That's good. That's smart coaching. Nothing wrong there. And then Houston, you can see, is kind of the opposite. When they're up, they were playing fast. When they were down, they were playing slower, which that to me doesn't make any sense. So just something to look at if you're doing first half, second half bets or see something you like. Also, I like looking at these, and especially when you see these rushing yards, passing yards allowed. When we do the videos during the season, we'll dig into these a lot because they're pretty predictive. I mean, it's kind of obvious. NFL is not really tricky anymore. I mean, everybody's looking at every possible thing they possibly can. I'm just trying to put it all in one place right in front of you to where you can do it quickly and efficiently. And then over here, we've got our basic stat breakdown. Our rankings of total offense, total defense, then we split it up rushing and passing, and then we do the same thing on defense, rushing defense, passing defense. And then I put this in last year, it was kind of fun, short pass defense, deep pass defense. You have some receivers that are just deep threat guys, and they don't get the short passes. Then you have other guys who are just the dink and dunk guys who only get short passes, so that was kind of fun to look at and see if that was predictive. This was one of my favorite ones here, allowed yards per rush attempt. So I put in the yardage number and the rank. So right here you could see last year Houston was giving up 5.2 yards per rush, which ranked 32nd. So they were dead last in the NFL at stopping the run. I mean, if you're giving up 5 yards a run, that's awful. But something to look at when you're looking for running backs. And then also efficiency, red zone TD percentage. They weren't very good in the red zone. And then Jacksonville was kind of mediocre. And then on the flip side, allowed red zone TD percentage, 9th and 9th, so about the same. Let's see what we got. Now for the stacks tab. Now whenever you're playing DFS, this is what I love to look at here when I'm trying to come up with a stack and I'm flipping through the games. So I'm going to try to just put this in the middle so you can hopefully see it. So we've got our QB, got our running back 2. I blacked out running back 3. That was irrelevant last year, and I'd rather have the space. And then we got the 4 wide receivers, 2 tight ends. And you can kind of see the QB and then the 2 top wide receivers and the top tight end are a little bit darker, so they kind of jump out at you. The other ones can kind of blend into the background a little bit, and you can decide if they're relevant or not. And then the running back, I made a different color just so you can kind of, hopefully it catches your eye. What's new right here, this is a lot of fun. So on the, the main slate, this is going to tell you what position rank they are. So like Trevor Lawrence is QB 22. So he's not ranked real high. James Robinson's running back 14. Chenault's wide receiver 26. Sharks wide receiver 40. And O'Shaughnessy, for some reason, is tight end 46. And then you go down here, and it kind of just tells you where they're at. That way, if you're looking at a stack, you could say, hey, I'm stacking QB 22 and wide receiver 26 and 40, which that doesn't sound very tough. These are just your normal DraftKings, FanDuel, salary projections. Do some rough numbers. Down here, we'll give you the stack prices. So this is the cost of doing the QB and the 2 wide receivers, QB, wide receiver 1, tight end, QB, wide receiver 2, tight end. Those are probably your most common stacks. And so you can kind of just look and see the difference in the price points. And then I'm going to fill this box in later on with what's kind of what I do for baseball, high, mid, low, mid. So you kind of have an idea. So you can see here, you stack these three at 17,000, an average of 56.67 per player. But if you go with this stack, it's only 13.7, which is 45.67 per player. And so it gives you a couple ideas of what you can do with some different stack options up here. And then over here, I brought in the DVP and I put it right next to it. So the quarterback, you can scroll across and say, okay, the team they're playing is 23rd against the QB. They give up 21.4 points. Running back, scroll across. Well, they're dead last against the running backs. They're giving up 34 points, so that's good that he gets highlighted green. Wide receivers, you scroll across, 25th, giving up 41 points. Tight end, 16th, 12 points. So you can kind of see the DVP here kind of right next to the players instead of scrolling somewhere else to look. I didn't have enough room to put in all the stats they're giving up, but this will give you something like I would look at this and say, okay, James Robinson, they're dead last, and we already saw the huge 5.2 yards per carry they're giving up. So if you did some research and said, hey, Houston's not going to be much better this year, he's someone that I would probably want to go look at for 6,400. He's probably going to have a lot of value. And then these are the projected stats for these players. And so the QB, so for Lawrence, you can see he's projected for 259 pass yards, 2 TDs, 10 rush yards, and 0.1 TD, which really didn't mean anything to me. Robinson, 73, half a touchdown, a couple receptions, 16 yards. Nothing amazing there. But you can kind of get an idea like who's projected to do what. So here with Marvin Jones, Shark, and Chenault, if they're all playing, you could see they're all three 4 to 5 receptions, and they're all about the same. There's really nothing there that separates them out. So if you did, for some God reason, want to stack Jacksonville, you could do one with like Lawrence Chenault, do one with Lawrence Shark, do one with Lawrence Marvin Jones, and you're likely going to get a couple of touchdowns in one of those, and it's pretty inexpensive for a stack. Same thing down here. Come down here, all the same information. And then to scroll through this, you click in this bottom team, which is the home team, and you get this drop-down box. I get so many people, they don't read this up here, and then they're like, there's no other games. What's going on? But you can kind of flip through, so you pick Kansas City, and it will give you all the stats and data. And I'm still kind of scrolling through it, making sure everything's pulling correctly. But this will show you, Mahomes, he's projected for 316 yards, 2.5 touchdowns. I'd round that up to 3. And then CEH, Cleveland was really tough against the running backs this year. They were the 5th hardest team, so that turns red. They only gave up 20.4 points, so he's projected at 61 yards, a third chance of getting a touchdown, and then 3 for 35 or 4 for 35. So I look at these projected stats and then the DVP, and then I kind of make a determination like, do I think this is reasonable? So they're really not giving up that much. I mean, 60 yards and then 4 catches for, we'll say, 40 yards. Yeah, that's doable. And, he may or may not get a touchdown. I think .36 is probably a pretty good indication. So I like that. And then against the QB, they were 27th. And then he's got a pretty healthy stat line here. So pretty much round up 2.5 to 3 TDs and 300 yards. He's going to get the bonus. So he's going to have a lot of value. And then Tyreek Hill. And what I like to see here is they're labeled wide receiver 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's based on the fantasy points that they're projected. So I don't really look to see who on the depth chart it says is wide receiver 2 versus wide receiver 3. I want to see where the projections are at and who's actually performing. So in this case, it's Hardman, and he comes up, which he's only projected for 13 points. So they've got him 4 for 60 and maybe a shot at a touchdown. Him or Tyreek will score at least 1. Kelsey's got a 75% chance of scoring a touchdown and 8 for 98. So just say 8 for 100. He's going to get the bonus, give him a TD. So he's going to have a good game there. So if I'm looking at this, I would stack Mahomes, who has a really good deal with, it looks like you could probably do Hill or Kelsey because they're 28th and 30th, but I probably would not use CEH based on that number. But again, last year's stats. So this is what the 2021 NFL cheat sheet is going to look like for now. I'm going to get this one posted up in the next day, but I wanted to get the video started and just kind of show you everything that was in here, and we'll do more videos as it gets closer. And other than that, have a good night, guys.